My name's Matthew Eltringham. I work for the BBC. I've worked at the BBC for some time, doing a whole range of different things. You've heard a lot of talk about what the BBC does in and around user-generated content. You've heard this slightly odd acronym, the UGC Hub. So I want to talk a little bit about what the UGC Hub does and how that fits into kind of the BBC's overall strategy around user-generated content and to an extent social media as well. So, what is the UGC Hub? The UGC Hub is a team of people of around about 20. There's about 20 journalists involved who work for the Hub. Their job is to scour the web, to find, to generate, to verify, authenticate, and then share within BBC News the most relevant and the best quality material out there. It could be the stuff that David's talked about. It could be stuff from Syria. It could be very, very simple stuff. The Hub sits in the heart, physically and metaphorically, of the BBC's newsroom, supplying all of the BBC's output, from World Service Radio to World Television to BBC One, the 6 o'clock news to the rolling news channels, radio, online, and it acts as a gatekeeper for all this kind of content. We started off many years ago. We started off back in 2005. This is a very famous picture that I'm sure you're all aware of. That in the history of user-generated content of the BBC is quite iconic. The Hub started off as a pilot project, as an idea, back in Christmas 2004, off the back of the Boxing Day tsunami, the December 26 tsunami across the whole of the Pacific. The BBC had a very simple, very basic interactive operation before that time, and December the 26th saw a flood, if that's not a slightly inappropriate way of describing it, of user-generated content, of audience video, of emails. Within the space of a couple of days, at the back end of 2004, we received 30,000 emails, 30,000 bits of video or stills describing what had happened with the tsunami. This was, of course, before the days of Facebook, before the days of Twitter. And it took over the BBC's output of that story. It's the way that we told that story. It's the way that everybody, frankly, told that story. But off the back of the tsunami, we realised there was an opportunity here to pull in the audience more into our storytelling. So we approached senior management at the BBC and said, look, we think there's something here. We think, this idea about, everybody now has got mobile phones. They were, the old Nokia phones with not many pixels in their cameras, and the pictures were quite grainy. But there was something in here about engaging the audience in our journalism, and that adds value to what we're trying to do. We didn't receive a particularly warm welcome at the time. Most of the senior news execs at the time said, "Yeah, it's a one-off, the tsunami. It won't happen again. And if it did, what would we need this stuff? Would we want it anyway?" But fortunately, there was one guy who had a bit of money at the time, a senior news exec called Adrian Van Claveren, had £30,000 in a spare pot. He said to us, "Go off. 3 months, 3 people, pilot project, tell us what you think, tell us what it was like, and then we'll take a view." We hadn't fully set the team up by the time July the 7th came around, and about 11:30 on the morning of July the 7th, 2005, this picture came into the BBC's, into my operation, which completely changed the view of how user-generated content should be brought into the BBC and how it should be used. This is a picture that went around the world. All the images that you saw that you connect with the 2005 London bombings came to the BBC first. Every single one of them came to the BBC first. So, at that point, we realised that we were onto something. So, what happened next? We spent years building up that 3-person team, making up the rules as we went along, frankly. By 5 to 10 on the morning of July the 7th, we'd had credible information about every single bomb that had gone off in London. At that time, we had no idea what we were doing. We hadn't a clue what we were doing. Now, it would be an entirely different story. The ideas around verification and authentication, we didn't have a clue. We were making it up as we went along, based on kind of core journalistic principles that you've heard a lot about this afternoon. Now, the kind of stuff that we're looking at is video like this. This is a video that was scraped from YouTube from Syria. It was posted purporting to be, if you can just play that for me, thank you. It was purported to be, it was put up by the Free Syrian Army, showing allegedly the, that's okay, keep going, showing allegedly the burial alive of a campaigner. If you can make that a bit bigger. This is allegedly someone being buried alive. Now, was this real video? Was it not real video? Should it be used or shouldn't it be used? These are the kind of issues that David raised earlier early this afternoon that we can kind of go back and talk about a little bit more through the rest of the hour. But looking at this, working out, should we use it, shouldn't we use it? Is it a genuine piece of video? It looks genuine, but it's an event that happened. But what does it really mean? What is it really showing? Is this guy being buried alive? Is he a member of the Free Syrian Army? Are these people really from the Syrian Army itself? It's the stuff that we're dealing with every day. Now, just to show hands, who thinks that's real? Yeah? It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. We decided that it probably wasn't. We decided that it was, and actually there was a lot of conversation between the BBC's team and David's team as well around this bit of video. If you look back at it, I'll not make you watch it again, but if you look back at it, there are issues around the guy in the ground. If you look at how he's talking, what's happening around his mouth, there's no air. There doesn't seem to be any blowing away of the dust around his mouth. The camera cuts away very, very quickly at the end of it. So you don't know that he's left there. He could immediately have been dug up out of the ground. We went to the in-house BBC Arabic speakers. What were they saying? What accents were they using? The whole range of other verification techniques that led us to think, to surmise, because verification, we've had a lot of talk about verification. Verification is an art, not a science. You piece together a view. You can't say definitively whether it is or whether it isn't. You take a view, basically. And we took a view that wasn't a real, that was, the context and the analysis around that piece of video was that it was not what it purported to be, so we chose not to use it. So it's a very specialised job that the UGC Hub do, but it's not. But the use of user-generated content around the BBC isn't kept to. It isn't purely the job of the UGC Hub. Increasingly in the BBC, it is a job that we feel that everybody in the organisation needs to do and must do. This is quite a famous quote from Peter Horrocks, who is arguably the second or third most important person in BBC News. And he's a very forward-thinking journalist. He runs BBC News' international output. And the view within the BBC now, kind of actually framed by this quote here, is that if you don't know how Twitter works, if you don't know how Facebook works, if you're not on there, if you're not using all the key tools that the social web now gives you, you can't do your job properly as a journalist. You cannot do that. So consequently, the BBC has spent a lot of time and a lot of resources training its staff. Every single journalist, from the lowest to the highest, have a decent understanding now of how the social web works and how to find what they need as part of their jobs. Because this stuff is just another source. It's another source in the same way that the wires are a source, that the papers are a source, that talking to a guy down, your contacts in the particular patch that you're covering is another source, and you need to be equipped to be able to use that. So as a result, the kind of things that happen now, if you could play this video for me as well. This is a bit of video that we put together from the Christchurch earthquake. It's about a very junior journalist on one of our local radio stations, and she talks through how she used the social web to find a fantastic story for a local radio station.
Passion for Kent. BBC Radio Kent.
Overnight, there's been a major earthquake in Christchurch in New Zealand. The death toll there, 60.
Hi, I'm Selena Williams. I was working at BBC Radio Kent as a broadcast assistant when the Christchurch earthquake hit. I decided it was important to get a local angle, get a local person on that was involved within the earthquake. Twitterful.com, which is a website that brings together tweets from across the world. In the search engine, I put in 2 keywords, Christchurch and earthquake. I then put into the radius search Ashford, Kent, with a 50k radius. Twitterful generated a list, a real-time list of all the people in Kent tweeting about the Christchurch earthquake. Within that search, I found an anxious mother tweeting about her son that was caught up in the earthquake. So after contacting the mother on our Twitter account, we got a message back with her number. I gave her a call, however, she was reluctant to give me her son's number. However, I did get a name, Keith Hake. Using Google Advanced Search, I put in the son's full name. I also put in 2 keywords, Christchurch and Marden. I also did the search within the domain facebook.com. This brought up 3 results, one of which brought me to Keith Hake's Facebook account. I was able to message him directly, asking for his mobile number. He responded within 5 minutes. So at 8:52, Keith Hake was put on air live into our breakfast programme.
We can cross now live to Christchurch and speak to Keith Hake. He's originally from Mecca.
Cars are rocking and moving, and yeah, it's pretty scary stuff.
This was 20 minutes after finding the original tweet. Social media is brilliant for case studies. How else would I have been able to find a man from Kent on the other side of the world caught up in the Christchurch earthquake?
20 minutes. She was in Kent. The other guy was the other way around, halfway around the world. In 20 minutes, she found a great interview for her local radio output. I mean, that's why we're spending so much time and so much effort at the BBC in making sure everybody is up to speed in understanding how social media and user-generated content works. But it's not just in finding core content and core material like that. This is our breaking news. This is our live blog that hopefully you'll be generally familiar with. We include, increasingly including tweets, Facebook updates, blogs into our content. This is a great example here. There's an official source for the West Midlands. This is around the riots. We've talked about the riots. There's an official source tweeting. There's a BBC correspondent tweeting, and right below @Charlie Sefton in London is tweeting user-generated content. We're increasingly pulling that into our journalism. We retain the editorial decision-making, we retain the editorial control, but pulling the audience into our journalism is what we're trying to do increasingly all the time. Now, this is a sneak preview of the BBC News' new newsroom, multi-million-pound newsroom in the heart of London, back in Broadcasting House, the ancestral home of the BBC. This was taken last week, so not everybody's in there at the moment. But as you can see, they will be in about 3 or 4 months' time. But this is what it looks like. It's the most amazing place. It is absolutely incredible. One of the great opportunities that the move back to Broadcasting House has afforded the BBC is to pull in its World Service people who were housed elsewhere, pulling in people from the website, from all different parts of the BBC, and pulling them into one building and sharing each other. So the whole multimedia idea is really coming home in this newsroom in New Broadcasting House, but it's also allowing us to integrate even more the way that user-generated content influences and affects our journalism. The UGC Hub have got a desk just out of shot, but there will be, as part of the middle desk here, which is all the key news editors will be sitting, there will be someone sat there sharing intelligence. So conventional sources and, if you like, unconventional sources. They will be sat next to each other, talking to each other and playing off each other and working out how that can then influence our journalism. We've got a team that you're all hopefully will be familiar with the BBC's breaking news Twitter accounts and its core social media accounts. Increasingly, we're looking at building up a more bespoke writing presence around that and engaging a bit more with the audience through those kind of stuff, through those platforms. And again, that will be made much easier and much clearer in the heart of this newsroom. They're all starting over the next few months. But as you've heard already from David and from Charlie, this is all about core journalistic values. So everything that we do at the BBC relates back to our core values of impartiality, accuracy, truth, objectivity. Social media, as David has said very articulately earlier today, the journalism remains. We are applying those core values that are important to journalism, context and analysis and understanding, but applying those into a different landscape. Nothing changes with the journalism. The core BBC values and the way that we use social media, the way that we use user-generated content remain. It's just that we are, looking at them and applying them in a different way. And hopefully, in the conversation, the discussion after this, we can tease those out a little bit more. But that's hopefully given you a brief outline as to how we at the BBC use social media and user-generated content. Thanks very much.
Hello, I'm Erik van Heeswijk. I'm the Chief Editor Digital of the VPRO. And I want to talk to you about a slightly different angle on this issue. We've heard a lot about the verification process and how important that is. But there's also another side of, I think, of user-generated content. And that is where your audiences begin really to interact with you, and then you have a connection, and then you can really work with them. It's not only a question of verification, but it's also a question of molding your public into a high-quality source, if you will. And my story begins not at the VPRO, but the job that I had before that, and that was a strategic advisor of a lot of magazines and broadcasters and newspapers. And I came in for two things. I gave advice to chief editors and directors and people like that, but I trained the journalist. And coming on those news floors, I had a lot of interviews with journalists, and that's easily said than done. I asked them, what do you think about user interaction? How does that feel, right? And we're at the beginning. How does that feel? And when I talked to them, just one image appeared alongside every newsroom 5 years ago. And it was like this. Working with audiences, they felt like it was an orc attack. It was, they didn't know what was coming. There was just a rampage of savages just shouting whatever they want. And newsrooms across the Netherlands just really felt like this, a rampage. And if you started really talking to them, then there's three problems that they just acknowledged. It was anonymous. They felt like it's an avalanche. It's not persons, it's an avalanche. And the avalanche is, well, like any avalanche, not to be controlled. You cannot do anything about it. It's just flooding you, right? And it's not a pleasant experience. And the quality of what they perform is dubious. There's not a lot of things to be done except trying to verify what they're doing, and in an avalanche that's quite difficult. And on the other hand, a lot of newspapers just closed the gates. They had fora, they had all kinds of means to talk to the public, and they just closed down. It was too much of an effort, and they couldn't wrap their heads around them. So one of the key questions was, can we just do anything about the quality of the user interaction? Can we enhance the quality? Except from verifying, can we just engage with the public and try to make them sending you better stuff? And this, for many newsrooms, was an impossible question to answer. There was just too abstract questions. That was just 5 years ago, right? It was just too complex. And I started thinking about a model, a training module for journalists, just an image that they can work with. And I came up with this. I said to them, okay, forget everything you know about journalism. It's not important. We're trying to run a karaoke bar today. And I did this training session with maybe 1,000 journalists. And they said, okay, you have a karaoke bar, you have a lot of budget, but you have one problem. You're the owner, but your business is declining. And the key problem is that your singers on stage are just awful. And people just are are just not coming anymore. And when they're not coming, they're not buying drinks, and you get bankrupt. So you still have some savings now, and you can apply it to making people sing better. How do you do that? And I asked a lot of journalists to do that and think about half an hour in just groups. And they came up with a lot of answers. They came up with keeping the bad singers off the stage, to vote or applaud, just random stuff about running a karaoke bar. And little did they know, because I didn't tell them it was about user-generated content, little did they know that all the measures that they invented, and there were quite brilliant ones actually, were just you can transpose into the user-generated content problem. For example, if you add free singing lessons, maybe that's a good suggestion on your site to have free writing lessons. As a newsroom, you can pick the themes, and that's difficult for them to try really to mold your public into themes. But they hadn't any problems to pick the songs, for example, when they were in the karaoke bar, or to hang up invitations on the singing schools, for example. And why wouldn't you invite interesting opinion leaders for discussion, for example? That wasn't the suggestion they came up with, but it was unproblematic in running the karaoke bar. That's all fine and well, but 5 years ago there were 3 top suggestions in running the karaoke bar. And remember, you had some savings, right? So you could build and hire a contractor. And the top suggestion was not have this massive hall of karaoke where everybody needs to listen to I Shot the Sheriff, but just compartment the hall, just making a small hall for hard rock and a small hall for reggae. So, and this leads to 2 things. The public really values the music coming in. So if you're a reggae lover, you will automatically value the singer on stage if it is reggae. But on the other hand, it invites a lot of reggae singers. The people who are in the public really valuing hard rock are probably more suspect to sing well at hard rock, for example. And I advised a lot of websites, listen, 5 years ago, then you had no Facebook and Twitter, but a lot of websites to make discussion groups smaller and more focused, so you could have more really high quality interactions. I think the probably best method to make people perform better is to give them attention. And again, journalists had no problem identifying that solution in the karaoke bar. They said, okay, well, build a more spectacular stage with nice lamps, and so that everybody comes up there, really tries to make it work. And if you ask them, well, do you do that on your website? People sending you photos or emails or just interact with you, do you really value their contributions? What do you do with them? And they say, well, they're just sources and just raw material, and they go into a big bucket and we make a nice story of it. But frankly, people don't work like that. If you don't value their contributions, just pick a name on them. They stop really chipping in there and sending you stuff. Now, in the again, in the karaoke bar, that was simple. And even on there, the pat on the back from the owner is still a classic. Sometimes an editorial room just needs to say, well, that was a great contribution. Keep adding on there. And I think journalists are not they're not used to thinking about how important that really is, to really value that. Now, the karaoke model worked on a couple of thousands of journalists, but there were some conclusions in Dutch, I think. I think, why is user-generated content so important to you? It's, of course, a source of information, but sometimes it's not a source of information. It's just a mass involvement on the brand, which is okay. But you have different standards about what you're going to do it. Just the realization of the fact that you can influence the quality of user interaction is just massive importance. You start working with your public, you start really molding them into a source that you can really act with. Watch out that your interaction groups don't get too big. I saw the Twitter feeds of the countries, right? That's precisely what it's going to, how it's going to work. If you get Twitter feeds of Egypt, that's taking you to another level than taking a Twitter feed of the whole world and all important people in there. Let the people really know that you really, really value their effort. That makes you want to a connection to the organization that you're a part of. And lastly, good user-generated content is not free content. It takes organizations like the BBC massive amount of time and energy to make that work. So it's if you're the boss of the company and say, well, okay, that's nice because it's free, it's not free. And try to make it work, try to spend money on it because the quality that you get is really important. I wrote it all down in a Dutch book, but I really want to take you to a VPRO example of that. We at VPRO asked ourselves one question a couple of years ago. How can we, and it's not a very journalistic example, but it's really nice, how can we be present at music concerts where we're not present? And how can we make the audience work for us at that time? So we invented Film It Yourself, which is a music app that was created a few years ago. You can download it to your iPhone and you can start filming. And when you you click send on your mobile phone, it just sends the video right to us. But it also does something remarkable. It sets it on the timeline. So we had a lot of effort taken in there to make all these streams on the same timeline. You really get synchronization of the timelines. But also, at the same time, you get geotags involved there. So you can make it really work on a map, for example, on a Lowlands festival or something like that. It's also a nice example, for example, for a marathon or a political event. So you can make it work for any event that you can imagine, but we use it for music. And I just want to show you, as a last remark, how people really film a concert themselves. And as a last part, we made it possible to really choose the angle on the mobile phones that you want. So you can click on one mobile phone, turn the audio off or on, and you get a whole other picture of a music concert.
Yeah, enjoy.
So you click on one, right? Then you got that image. And what about verification on a live moment there? Okay, thank you.
So I've been doing a lot of trainings on, to journalists on how to use crowdsourcing information, how to use user-generated content, and so on. And in my experience, and maybe my experience is definitely limited, but in my experience, I've had 3 different types of reactions. One is, oh my God, go away. I'm a professional journalist. I don't want to hear anything about that. This is gonna, leave me without a job. The second kind of reaction is, this is great, this is awesome, we can do a lot of things with that, kind of like BBC type of approach. And the third reaction is, this is great, this is very interesting, I need to be on this because this is what everybody is talking about. But then the kind of like the way that a lot of journalists are using those tools is applying exactly the same methodologies that they were applying before, in the sense that, for example, they have a Twitter feed, but their Twitter feed is like a newspaper. They publish their content there. They don't engage in a two-way communication because it's not part of what they're used to work with. And I think that in a kind of way is related to resources, how much resources you actually have to be able to use and tap into this kind of like user-generated content. In a kind of way is also related to what kind of background and education the journalists are coming out from. Are actually universities and academics really preparing these journalists to get into this type of world? And in a kind of way is also, you know, can you really find the right people in the right organization, in the right position that allow you to experiment and go into this kind of like new way to do things? So who wants to start?
There's an awful lot in there. I mean,
I know.
there are those. First of all, those three responses. Yes, we have those. We've had those three responses across the BBC's, across BBC News from the beginning, and we still have those three responses from individuals across the organisation. You're absolutely right about the power of about the cultural change and getting a broader acceptance about the importance and the power of this kind of material within the organisation, and that stems from a whole range of different things. I mean, I spent the first 4 or 5 years of running the hub feeling like one of those athletes training with dragging a huge great tractor tyre behind me, because people would go, well, you know, why would I, exactly those responses, why would I want this? What use is this to me? And you've got to give people, you know, what they want. You know, what stuff that will make them think, God, well, of course I want that. Of course I want a picture of a burning Jeep driving into Glasgow Airport. Why would I not want that? That's fantastic. And then they get the idea, they get the message. There's no point banging your head against the wall against people who look at it and go, that's a load of old rubbish, because you're wasting your time. Eventually, those people will look over the shoulders of their colleagues and go, oh, that's quite interesting. Yeah, maybe I will have a bit of that. And then the power of rainmakers in the organisation as well should not be underestimated. Individual people within the BBC News organisation, Peter Horrocks is one, Kevin Backhurst, who has just left to go to RTE, very influential in laying the foundation and getting their teams and other people within the organisation to see the value of it.
Yeah, and I would, if I can just sort of expand on that, I think, again, some of the challenges and some of the reasons I took advantage of the opportunity to sort of leave CNN and start from scratch is that there are a lot of issues that you have to deal with when you work for a major news brand. You know, you just by yourself, your one tweet, your one Facebook update, no matter how isolated it is, can represent your entire brand and its whole history and trust and everything. So there's a huge burden on somebody who's working in that environment. And one of the advantages that we sort of allowed ourselves to have by being very small and under the radar at first with Storyful is we were able to engage and say things and ask things in public that a major news organization either couldn't do or hadn't quite sort of formulated what the best way to do that now. And I think what Matthew and a lot of the insurgents still within, you know, within the larger news organizations are realizing that there are ways to do that. And, you know, in some cases it's partnering with us, and in other cases it's just sort of isolating that there are particular people or particular accounts that you can use to do that kind of interaction that leave the rest of your social media, you know, armory to do the publishing part. And I would equate it to what I would sort of call a production thinking process versus a news gathering thinking process. A lot of what happens on social media is really just production. It's pushing out product, you're broadcasting out. But the news gathering tradition that I come from, the desk tradition, is much dirtier and you know, you're much more engaged. But learning how to do that in public is a tough thing, because even for us now at Storyful, putting yourself, or like Andy Carvin's a perfect example at NPR, putting yourself out there in public, you open yourself to a huge wave of criticism or second guessing or why are you doing this? It's tough. But I do think there are solutions, and I think they're being found within larger news companies, and we're certainly sort of trying to perfect them, that if you ask the right question in the right way, you get a huge, you know, value from it. And that's when those aha moments happen, where somebody else who's been very cynical all of a sudden realizes, you know what, if I could learn how to do that, I would be a better journalist.
I think it's what they both say. That you need to give journalists what they really want, right? And they don't care ultimately how they get it. And if that the means is social media, well, so be it, right? So that's one part. I think another part is that journalists ultimately like transparency. So, and social media feels like a very transparent medium to them. So it's just working in the ground, really being there, right? And I think that's why social media is continuously appealing to a lot of journalists. And but I do think that the paradigm is shifting from reliability to transparency, and I think that is a notion of journalism that a lot of journalists are getting. And because transparency was always a part of their profession, so I think that's the key to really motivate them. And if they get really nice stuff in the meantime, that's all the better.
The only thing I'd add is that I know what you mean about the transparency thing, but in a way, I think actually journalists, we all look at this from quite a narrow perspective of what's in it for me as a journalist, and I don't think actually journalism in the past anyway has been very good at transparency. We didn't really like that. It was, it's like the joke about making sausages. You don't really want to know how they're made, and we don't want to tell you, because if you did, you wouldn't want our sausages. And so I think there was a sort of culture of we want to keep it to ourselves. I also slightly, not disagree with, but I think you have to be careful. If the maxim is only do crowdsourcing for what you can, or all that other stuff, for what you can get out of it, and that's effectively you're an extractive industry. You're like a mining industry, and that you're just trying to dig out the good stuff for what you think you need, rather than thinking about, hang on a minute, why were those people doing that stuff in the first place? Am I listening openly enough to what interests the public out there? Why are they taking photos of all that stuff? And those questions are quite difficult, because it makes you have to think, have I quite got the story right? I'll give you one very quick example. Matthew knows about this one. I used to use it endlessly. About 5-6 years ago, there was enormous snowfall, huge amounts of snow in the south of England in April or May. It was a completely wrong time of year, and there was this fantastic snowfall. The country stopped, or the south of England stopped, and everyone had to have the day off. And the headline on the news, the BBC News, was disaster for British economy, £9 billion worth of GDP lost because everyone stayed at home. Then if you went onto social media, what did you see? Millions of very happy, smiling people taking pictures of themselves, throwing snowballs, been with their kids on a Monday morning when they should have been in the office. So in terms of gross national happiness, it was a boom day. And these were two different, and neither story was wrong, but there were two different narratives. And of course the BBC, I think Matthew was doing UGC there, then started to reflect that. And if you go on the website, there are some fantastic galleries of people having a wonderful time on that day. So the BBC's kind of editorial judgment was at least added to. It wasn't just, it wasn't challenged as such.
And
so,
I mean, with the transparency part, journalists are used to saying to other organizations that they need to be transparent, right? So, and you can use that key to say to them, really say to them, you need to go from a product to a process. Because you need to be transparent yourself. And that's what I mean with using it as a key.
Yeah. And I will take that and be a little bit provocative here, because another thing that I'm able to say now, not working for a major news organization, is that part of the problem, if you want to put it that way, is that we've spent the last 20 or 30 years, particularly in the United States, but also in Europe, building up journalists to almost be stars. They're the story themselves, and there are particular people who I could name, but I won't until I've had a few drinks later, who are they think they're always the story. And believe me, I've been as peed off as other people when I'm on a desk whispering things into their ear, and then they say them on TV and they get all the credit, but it actually came from our people in the field or from our desk. So I think, taking from what you're saying, I think it is very tough for some journalists to be transparent. But I tell you what, it is absolutely essential. If you want trust, if you want to be taken seriously, and you're not prepared, no matter who you work for, to sort of put yourself out there a little bit and expose the process a little bit, even your own humility, then I think gradually speaking, those icons of journalism they'll lose that trust, because if they're seen to just be on an ivory tower and never engaging and never responding and never acknowledging that they've made mistakes, or even to your point, never acknowledging that their version of the story is not the only version of the story. Oh, so I think all of those things tie together to me to give a real challenge to that sort of star mode of journalism, but a great opportunity for the people who get it right, and there are some who have got it right.
And the individuals themselves have to be information analysts to get right about what in the world is going on. So I think they have more understanding about sausage making than ever before. So,
which improves the quality of the sausage.
It does. It does. It absolutely does.
I think it's time to stop the sausage. Just one very quickly to add to it, though, we're talking about journalism here, obviously, but I'm assuming that not everyone here works in journalism. I actually think this is even more important, that the same things we've been talking about apply to other organisations who are now creating content. And so, NGOs, Oxfam, government departments, they're all starting to act like journalists in a networked world. Well, they should be also taking the lessons in terms of... I had a
conversation with a gentleman who may still be here from Greenpeace earlier, talking about how we at Storyful and other news organisations love it when Greenpeace has great video of a boat being turned over by Shell. But that doesn't also mean that we're not very grateful when Shell has its own video of what happened. So I think it's very true that whether we like it or not, NGOs, organisations and journalists, the content's going to come from wherever it comes. Content is like water. It will find a way to get out. And I think what's really interesting about that is that anyone who thinks that they are telling the whole story by themselves is wrong. Whether it's Greenpeace, Shell, or a journalist. And that's, in some ways, that's actually the most interesting thing to me, is that is a challenge for the information consumer going forward, is that there are so many different perspectives that you would almost ironically miss the time when all you had to do is sit down at 6:30 and watch the news. Because there's now so many different versions of events. And I think that it's an interesting balance that in some ways you almost sort of crave, just tell me what happened. Just one person, just tell me what happened, because there's so much information out there.
But people are not bad at this, because every parent who asks their kids about how the school day was knows what uncertainty of information is, right? So we're used to that, we work with that, but we need to apply that to the news organizations.
But that's interesting, though, because what we're basically saying here is that not just in the media landscape, but in general with the social media or user-generated content, we are in a kind of way looking at a power revolution, if you want, where before there was one voice or one gatekeepers of information, if you want, and now there is not anymore. And so we go back to kind of like, okay, if I can find the information that I'm looking for in multiple voices, and so we're talking about multiple truth, if you want, then, are we going towards a landscape where I can just believe whatever I want, and there's no kind of like, there's no real what actually happened, there's just how do you see what happened, or how multiple people can describe what happened in multiple ways?
Well, I think actually you have to be very careful about using words like revolution in terms of the power balance. I do use that word, and a lot of my writing is about how, the power has shifted a bit, from, the traditional journalist who was the kingmaker and the gatekeeper. But that doesn't necessarily mean that therefore the power, there's some lovely democracy out there where people are creating all the information and spreading it. I mean, we do have to remember that, for example, the 1% rule, which is that, only 1% of people at any one time will be interested in being interactive, and of that, only 1% is at all meaningful or usable. Now, that 1% of 1% can still be a vast number if you're talking about the millions of people that watch the BBC. But the bottom line is that people don't want to be necessarily to be journalists. The idea that all citizens want to be citizen journalists isn't true. They want to communicate, and they want to produce content, but they'll do it completely in their own terms. So I think it's not so much that there's suddenly lots of different versions of our journalism, although I think, in some ways it actually becomes more homogenized. everyone's chasing the Kate Middleton story. That's top of the traffic rankings, therefore that's the only thing you're going to hear about. But I think it's more that you get a kind of a much greater diversity for the journalists of sources and platforms, but that's not the same as there suddenly being a million media organisations.
No, one of the big backbones of journalistic business models is the laziness of the public, I think.
Yeah,
still is. And you can have all the baking machines at home if you want, but you still go to the baker because it's a lot of fuss making bread, right? So I think that's the laziness is something we have to trust in. For the coming years.
It's laziness, but actually they've got terribly interesting other things to do.
Sure.
You know?
But also that it's often better bread.
Yeah.
You know, so the food analogies keep on coming. I'm sorry about that.
But
I mean, there was a number of studies. I mean, most recently Pew have just done relatively recently. I was trying to look it up earlier this afternoon to get the actual figures, but there is a remarkably high level of people don't believe anything they read on the web, particularly the social web, and they therefore find their way into the mainstream platforms because the mainstream platforms have an authority and a reputation that they know they need to keep up. You know, and remarkably, even I mean, we found this a few years ago when we did a small focus group. Even if you put on your own on a BBC News Facebook page, and that then finds its way into someone else's news timeline, with a great big F off BBC branding on it, people still don't believe it until they actually see it on the BBC News website. You know, it's very high numbers still don't believe stuff unless they see it in the context of a mainstream platform, a platform that has reputation, authority, and trust. So, you know, while we can talk, as much as we like about democratization, actually, what's happening isn't always that.
A question about Storyful? Because I'm really curious about, you say, well, we're taking things to maps, right? And that's, of course, very interesting. But why not make huge Twitter lists of surgeons or accounts or policemen, for example? Why the horizontal approach and not the vertical approach?
We do both. We do both. So I mean, there are some highly filtered feeds that we follow. This goes to the human algorithm concept I was talking about earlier. Is that and it's sort of connected to everything we're speaking about here, is if you wait for somebody to put their hand up and say, I'm a journalist, or today I'm going to be a journalist, you're not doing it the right way. We don't look for journalists. We look for information and we look for content wherever it is. And one of the approaches that we take is curation and creating very highly curated and filtered lists around a story or even a subject like that. So, and some of our clients and some of our people we make money from are not journalism organizations. They're others who want to track their brand or they want to track information about themselves. So that, yeah, highly filtered feeds also have a role. But, you know, also sort of going back to this sort of concept of finding the news in the noise, which is our mantra all the time. You know, one of the things, again, which I think is a fallacy, is that just because we as journalists, and we're all journalists here on this panel, think that something's interesting and we present it, doesn't mean that people are really going to truly engage it. They may say, oh yeah, that's important, but I'm still going to go and look for Kate Middleton pictures. I mean, there was just an article today about how hypocritical people are, and we probably are too. I mean, everybody is. You're going to look what you find it. But that also is the persistent challenge of journalism, is make the important interesting. And that was taught to me 20 years ago, and I would teach it to a journalist now. Make the important interesting. If you just say, it's important, that's not enough, right? And it's same for an NGO, same for anybody. It's important. So what? Is it interesting? You know, make it interesting. I mean, just, I'm cheating here while I was sitting down, and I was listening to you while you were doing it. I was applying my ADD to also helping. Our team is in a Yammer chat right now trying to verify some video that appears to show the US ambassador in Benghazi after he was badly injured. And is the crowd cheering because he's almost dead, or are they cheering because he's still alive? Right? That's verification in real time. That is, excuse my French, effing interesting, right? It's important, but it's compelling and it's interesting and it's, you know, that's going to really engage your audience far more than the 25, 30 other videos we may have had from Libya for the last few days. And, you know, I'm not trying to make sensationalists about it. I'm just saying that I think that if you can find ways to make the important interesting. That's actually a role that journalism can play now in a way far more than they could in the past.
Okay, I think we have some time for some questions. They're on the top.
Hi. One thing that's sort of been hinted at in a lot of the talks is that this verification is necessary because people are trying to fool you. So whether it's the FSA or somebody trying to sell shoes or whatever.
Or Greenpeace.
No. How often do you think you get fooled?
Well, I'll answer very quickly because that's our business. That's our bread and butter every day. Is we don't. Okay, I'm a journalist. We don't allow ourselves to get fooled, or at least I can't point to a situation in the last 2 years when we've been working where we have been completely fooled by something. But we also embrace the process. In other words, we would take something that appears to be like the video that we were talking about with Matthew there that we worked collaboratively on. We will embrace something and say, we're not going to ignore this because we have doubts about it. We're going to expose the process and talk about it. And ultimately, as Matthew said, take a position, or we do, or anybody could take whatever position they want, but the process has been exposed. And so, I wouldn't call that being fooled. I would call that looking at something and ultimately making a decision that it is not accurate or shouldn't be used, just like the bridge video I talked about earlier. And then it goes to that video I'm talking about, the Hartebeest too, because it's not all about serious stuff. It could be about anything. If you just say, well, I doubt it, so I'm not going to talk about it, that really, really is old-fashioned gatekeeping crap. You shouldn't ever put yourself in the position of saying, without really looking into this, I've got a gut, or somebody told me it's not real, or I don't think it's real, so therefore I'm not going to even mention it. That's a bad approach to take. Now, in terms of, have we been fooled? We're verifying everything in real time. So no matter how legitimate the source is, it could be the BBC, it could be anyone, mistakes can still be made, errors can happen. So if somebody tweets a picture or they send a YouTube video, and it has happened, very, very responsible journalists have retweeted so-and-so's dead without checking. They just retweet, But our position is that we're not actually going to alert our clients to anything until we've done the basic verification. Has that image appeared before? Is it a real image? Has it been manipulated? You can find that out in about 20 seconds. Right? And if you have any doubt, you don't just say, all right, we're not touching that. You say, first of all, to our news clients, FYI, we have reason to believe this image may be old, or we have reason to believe that Margaret Thatcher isn't dead, whatever it is. So I think I would proudly say that we don't allow ourselves to be fooled, but that doesn't mean that we just, we are able to say that because we engage in the things that some of which ultimately turn out to be fake. Do you know what I mean? In other words, we're not allowing ourselves to be fooled because we're saying, we're looking at this. And sometimes it turns out to be fake. That's not being fooled, that's looking at things, right? And engaging other people in that process. So I think in some ways the answer is, it's a bit of a, catch-22. We know people who are fooled all the time. We will sometimes look at things which ultimately turn out to be fake, but we phrase it and contextualize it in a way that makes it absolutely clear that we're in a process of verification.
I think, in a way, very quickly, the verification bit about true or false, it's tricky, but it's a technical issue. I don't actually think that's the problem, often. I think there's much more of a problem around, and this is about the speed of news or information flows as much as it is about the volume, or the volume is part of it. And so, for example, Greenpeace now generates, or it has done always, but especially now, generates a vast amount of material. Now, I think the problem is then about how you put it in context. So if you're using Greenpeace material, is it clearly labelled that this is a Greenpeace, thing? If Greenpeace take a journalist on a trip to show them some pollution, is that made clear that this was actually Greenpeace helping to facilitate something? I'm not suggesting any of those things are wrong, but so I think it's the same as the example I gave earlier about the Syrian opposition. it's not necessarily that the videos are false from the Syrian opposition, but just the volume that you're getting, is that going to distort the way that the story is told and the way the story is covered? So I think actually the verification bit itself is in a sense the least of your problems. I'm sure the three of them will disagree because they spend a lot of time having to verify stuff. But I think it's actually in the new sort of media environment, there's a much more, I don't know, contextual problem about, you know, where the information comes from.
You saw that a lot through the Iranian elections in Tehran.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's a classic example of that where you've got, I mean, shed loads and shed loads and shed loads of stuff from the opposition, but nothing at all from the government side. So that gave you the impression that the whole of the country was up in arms against Ahmadinejad, when in fact that wasn't the case. You know, so understanding the context and putting that into some kind of, you know, overall view, I think is absolutely key. I mean, I just quickly, I mean, it's not always about people wanting to deliberately fool you. Quite often it's them being helpful. Oh, I found this, I thought you might be interested.
Yeah.
You know, a mate sent it to me, and a mate of a mate of a mate of a mate sent it to me. You know, and it's not just about trying to pull the wool over your eyes. And finally, the final point I'd like to add to this one is it's back to transparency. I think this is encouraging news organisations to open up their verification processes and say, and let people know, well, you know, we think this is what it says it is. We've made it. You know, we're confident it's reached this bar of genuineness. But you know, which is high enough for us to share it with you. There's still a bit of a gap, and we're not quite sure what it means, but talking around that and putting some context and understanding around that, I think is kind of where we're going a little bit more now.
And some news organisations will say that. The BBC won't ever even say that. They won't say, we've got this material, we've got no idea if it's true, but have a look at it. You know. Now,
Sky, and that's not. I mean, sorry, yes, exactly, and that's not an excuse for just shoving any old rubbish out there and saying.
If it's Sky News, for example, they may take a more liberal approach, as it were. They might say, look, we have just got this material. Yeah, you know, we've got this stuff in. God, it's fantastic. No idea if it's true, but have a look, and we'll confirm it in 5 minutes' time.
Well, which is more or less the approach that Al Jazeera was taking in the case study that I was showing, which was this is the user-generated content that's out there. You can look at it. We don't know if it's verified or not. We don't know if it's true or not.
And then the challenge there for mainstream media organisations is, well, what's the point of you then? You know, what are you adding to the process? If this stuff's out there on social media anyway, what are you adding to the process if all you're doing is saying, look, all this stuff is out there? So, and I think that's a fundamental question the media has to ask itself.
I think also one of the things is I wish I could charge $1 for every time somebody on the web uses the word confirmed. When they're not a journalist or they don't understand what confirmed means. And then people will take the word confirmed on a tweet and just resend it because it's got the word confirmed in it. And I think the burden on journalists wherever we work and whatever, you know, role we're filling is to take real true ownership of that terminology. You know, what does confirmed mean? What does verified mean? And I think it's not always possible to answer that question, but I think it's very important to do whatever we can as journalists to make sure that people, the general public, has a better understanding of what those words mean or what they mean in journalism.
Well, but I think that's a whole it's a very journalistic approach. But there are a lot of organizations we agreed on that were also a player in that communication society, right? And for a lot of organizations, just curating, just bringing it out to the audience is enough for them. It's about taste or culture or fun or whatever. And a verification doesn't play a major role in their bringing communications to or information to an audience. So we need to be careful that our thinking about verification doesn't apply for a lot of players in the information society. And maybe it shouldn't be. But I think that's a very die-hard journalistic approach.
Okay, I think we have time for one question more.
One of the ways I saw from Erik from Heeswijk that film it yourself. You made a tool by the VPRO, which was a certain process for a particular occasion. Did other people? What is your experience with videos who were created through the tool? And did the BBC also come up with tools so that you have your own channel? Like CNN does a lot of things. You know, they have a whole process of getting videos up on the website through a process. Have you created tools, and what is the experience? Because everybody has these wonderful smartphones with good quality, but how do you verify, and have you created your own tools, and what's your experience with that?
We have an unproblematic approach to film it yourself because we mostly use it for music concert, where verification was, as I said, is not a big issue. So they're there or they're not, and you can see in the image if they're there. And well, okay, we're a big broadcaster, but we're not a news organization, so we don't use it for a news process. But I think it can be a problem, and because it's on music or on culture or on some culture events where we use it, we can just say, okay, we've got this in for my audience, take a look at it. There's no verification involved, but nor it should be. So, but I do think that the NOS wanted to use it for Koninginnennacht, I can only say it in Dutch, Queen's Day, where the Queen is traveling through the city, and then you can really use Film It Yourself to make a recording of the carriage along the route, and there you're starting to get some issues, and how you can solve that is really the geotagging, for example, is involved. So you can really say, okay, that person was there on that specific moment. But of course, there are always methods to fool just a tool like that.
And just in my world, related to that question, we work in two ways on that. One is, for instance, with the YouTube/human rights, we work in partnership with Witness on that. So we do the verification of the video, and we also geotag everything. But Witness also has a program where they teach people who are either human rights activists locally or people who want to transmit video that might be related to human rights. They teach them, I think it's called Video for Change, and they teach them how to use their camera as well. They also teach them how to stay anonymous, because that's a big issue in human rights area, that you can use a camera, but in some ways you want to take off the metadata and the geotagging because it could reveal something about yourself. But on the other hand, there are other ways to transmit that metadata separately so that the image and the metadata can maybe connect it later without revealing your identity. And then also we work with Google on google.com/elections, which is following the elections process in the US, and we also do it in Brazil and Ghana and everywhere else. And in those cases, we work locally with either local journalists or others, and we have an app that allows those people to upload video and automatically include geolocation and metadata and everything else. So I have a dream that all the news organizations, and hopefully Storyful as well, would be able to work with big web companies and technology companies that produce the iPhones and the cameras and everything else to really teach people how to do this properly. Because if social media content is becoming so important, quality becomes an issue. You know, metadata becomes an issue. So it's great that everybody's filming something, but it would be even better if they turned the camera upside down, or, you know, actually focused, or didn't pan so far, or didn't do a 20-minute video when you only needed 2. So I'm not asking everyone to be a journalist, but there are ways in which I think tech companies, news companies, and others can help people who want to do that do it in a better way.
But would you send, for example, if there's a disaster in Turkey and there are and you know of 10,000 people that are present there with an iPhone, would you ask them to download, film it yourself, and just shooting away? Would you do that?
Well, if we had to, yes, or we'd ask them to I'm not going to ask them to download your app. I'll ask them to download my app. But we might. But again, we also take an approach at Storyful, which is probably similar to news organizations, is sometimes you don't want to interfere with the stream. In other words, if you engage with somebody, they might change their behavior. You know, they might decide that they want to get paid, or they might decide that they don't want to share, or something like that. So as much as possible in a breaking news situation, you would just simply find the video and contact them directly to find out if they would give access to it. But when it's a planned event, like an election, we're constantly outreaching all the time to people who we know are political activists or who have been following the campaign trail and planning ahead, and they download the app.
But would you do it live, for example? So if an app like that would stream live, there's no time for verification, for example. You just streaming away.
Well, again, I mean, one of the things that we're trying to work on with YouTube and others is more live streaming of events. It drives me crazy that, you know, there are great systems like Bambuser and Ustream and everything, but the quality level is still not really great. And I would love, there's so much capability in these phones nowadays why aren't people doing more live streaming? And why can't you live stream to your YouTube channel, or do more, make it easier to live stream to Facebook? I think those things are possible, but I think it's definitely something that people don't think of automatically.
Oh, no, but the question was, how do you see that verification process? Because there's no time to check.
Oh, you can check.
Matthew,
you can still do geolocation, you can still look at their profiles, you can still look at all of the things that surround them in real time, and we do that all the time with bamboozer signals and everything else. Just because somebody says, here's a live bamboozer signal from Damascus, is it really Damascus? What mosque is that in the background? They're saying it's live, what's the weather like in Damascus today? I can check all of those things, and I can correspond to other information in real time.
I'll ask the question in a slightly different way. The BBC, the UGC hub was built out of people sending content to the BBC. We had and we still have a fairly basic system where people send stills and video in. We've had, if we're talking specifically around breaking stories, a massive success. I mean, around, any and every big breaking news story, anywhere in the world, a huge success. When it comes to other stuff, though, it's a bit more interesting and it's a bit more of a mixed bag. With non-news stories, well, it depends. I mean, the weather stories in Britain are fantastic. When it snows, people can't help themselves but take pictures. I mean, there was one particular snow week when the whole of the country, it was a different snow week to the one Charlie mentioned. We had 65,000 pictures of snow sent to us in the space of a week, which was absurd. But what's extraordinary is if that summer we had a similar week of fantastically hot weather. We got 65 pictures. And quite why people take pictures when it's snowy and not when it's hot, I still don't know. I still haven't worked out. But it is an observed phenomenon, I can tell you. Finally, if we're asking people, I mean, we would never commission or ask people to do anything specifically around kind of breaking or dangerous news stories. We wouldn't commission them to do that. But we have had mixed success in saying, well, there's an election. Tell us what your message would be to the Prime Minister. What would your manifesto be? We've tried that, and we've had mixed success with that. Frankly, I mean, people, have got better things to do. Frankly. Yeah. And it doesn't doesn't really work.
Well, what did you promise to do with the output?
We'd show it. We put it on the website, but that still didn't seem to.
I would say it's probably a lot easier in entertainment or music.
I think that's the point.
People have a sort of vested interest in sharing in the fact that they're there. We've had the same experience. The outreach around politics and news and things like that is limited success. When you get something, it's usually very good because somebody's taken that choice. But when you think about resources and how you're allocating them, spending tons of time asking people to do something versus finding better tools to find what people are doing anyway, and filling out the picture that they haven't supplied in terms of other information, we tend towards not asking. We do ask, but we tend towards just harvesting collecting and contextualizing and then asking for permission and doing all of those things once we've discovered it. I think there's probably an equation that will change a little bit there where better platforms and better systems will become available. But so far, anybody asking people to do something usually doesn't work that well. Yeah. Sometimes things happen like that, in some sort of organic way, and that's when with snow or something, and that's magical. But asking doesn't usually work.
I would love to go on with this conversation, but they're going to kill me because we're already out of time. So thank you very much, everybody. It was a fantastic panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.